So we do keep it interactive, and let's use the chat as well as you go through the stuff that you see that you like, and the stuff that you want to, questions you want to ask, debates you want to get into. Let's use the chat. Let's get it really interactive. I'm going to pass over to Alberto now to introduce himself, and looking forward to the next 55 minutes.
Hello, everyone. Many of you know me already. I'm Alberto, originally from Spain, living in the Netherlands, in The Hague, very close to Ravia as well, and not so far from Barbara as well. And I'm a co-founder of the Purpose Collective, as well as a founder of a consulting business, which is called Just on Purpose. So it's everything about purpose here with me. I help organizations and leaders and teams to uncover their purpose and do more things led by it. And I'm very glad I changed the thing that made me happy about the start of the year. The new one is that I didn't forget to press the record button this time. So we often forget, for the people who are not or are new for this to these sessions, we forget many times. And so we didn't this time, so that's good. I'm going to pass over to Sarah to introduce herself a bit.
Thank you, Alberto. Good morning, good afternoon, a very warm welcome to you to this session. I'm Sarah Rozenthuler, speaking to you today from bright and sunny London. These sessions are in part about injecting some positivity into your week. And so great to have some sunshine. I'm a business psychologist by background, delighted to be leading the session today on how authentic dialogue sustains purpose. So,
all right. So we are going to start with a couple of questions from me to you, Sarah.
Okay.
So we're going to talk about dialogue. Why are you so passionate about this? I know that you live in Spain for a while, and we talk a lot. So maybe that's coming from there, or.
Well, I was very happy in my years living in Spain. I always loved the warmth of the Latin people and the chattiness. But I would say my interest in dialogue probably goes way back, actually, in my life. I'll keep this brief. I was brought up in a large family, and there was little overt conflict in my family. But as a kid, I could sense bubbling underneath the surface sometimes, things that were unspoken, not being said. And once in a while, one of the grown-ups would sort of like explode with anger. And as a kid, I found that quite scary. And I think that's when my curiosity began. Like, how do you talk about difficult things without being in silence about them or having explosions, which aren't very productive? So I think my interest in dialogue goes way back, and I'm passionate about it these days because I see the difference it makes. Good quality dialogue to the performance and well-being of people in the workplace.
Well, thank you. And the last question from me, but and maybe you're going to talk about this in the session as well, but where do you see the link between, what's the link between, dialogue and purpose?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I specialized in dialogue facilitation for many years, about 15 years. And then in the last 5 years or so, I've really included a focus on purpose in my dialogue work and team coaching work. And what I notice is that the energy in the room shifts when we include purpose. It drops to a deeper level, I think partly because we're including existential questions like, why are we here? What are we really doing? And then I think when a group of people or individuals start to get in touch with and connect with a meaningful reason that they exist, it buzzes them, it energizes them. And then that energy powers people to do great work individually and collectively. So I see a real clear connection between dialogue and purpose.
Well, thank you so much. And, the floor is yours, Sarah.
Thank you very much. So there's lots of ground I want to cover with you. And so I'm going to share some slides, give you a bit of content, a bit of input, things to think about. And then in about 10 minutes or so, we're hoping to get you into breakout rooms, interacting with one another. It's an opportunity to network and digest some of the content and see what sense it makes to you. So let me share my screen here and take you through some thoughts around how authentic dialogue sustains purpose. And so I don't know what the hot topics are in your organisation and in your team at the moment. This is one I've come across with teams I've worked with recently. Let's work a 4-day week. And I've participated in some lively conversations about that. You might be aware there's some research coming out showing that the 4-day week actually can increase productivity and a sense of well-being. It can also be a tricky topic to talk about because people can have very divergent views about this. And this need, as I'm going to put it, for greater dialogue sits within a context where work and our relationship with work is really being brought into question. Some people are talking about the anti-work movement. That's what this hammock is trying to symbolize. Alberto ran a session a few weeks ago on the Great Resignation. And again, I'm sure you're aware of this, the trend that more people are quitting their jobs than ever, not necessarily actually giving up work, but switching roles because people want work that feels more meaningful to them. There is, of course, the no jab, no job policy that some organisations are implementing. And again, that might be a hot topic, as could be hybrid working. So there are multiple topics that call for good quality dialogue. And I think if we can just stay in the room, whether it's the Zoom room or the in-person room, and talk together about those things where you might have quite big differences of opinion, then I think a positive way forward is more likely to emerge. So that's the bigger context that this session is really sitting within. What is dialogue? I could spend the whole of the hour talking about this, so I'm just going to give you a couple of starters for 10 around this. So first off is a definition of dialogue from Bill Isaacs, who's written one of the seminal books in the area. I had the good fortune of working with Bill, who's based East Coast in the United States for about 5 years. And Bill talks about dialogue in the following way. Dialogue is a conversation with a center rather than sides. So what he means by that is rather than us taking sides and very fixed positions and it all getting quite polarized, we have a center to the conversation. That could be a topic like, let's work the 4-day week, discuss. But there's a clear focus in the center that generates energy and engagement. Bill goes on to say that it's a way of taking the energy of our differences and channeling that energy towards something new, something that's not been created before. And so dialogue, authentic dialogue, can lift us out of polarization and into a greater common sense that comes from building a shared understanding. And therefore it's a means for accessing the intelligence and coordinated power of groups of people. And I think what we can see in this definition is dialogue is not just a talking shop. It's not just people having a chat. It can have real potential in it for creating positive change. Dialogue can be a portal or a doorway to a whole new chapter. In my own book, I describe conversation or dialogue as a co-creation. So really there's this sense of participation and inclusion. Every voice in the conversation matters. It's that co-creation. And so another way we could think about dialogue is in terms of contrasting it with other forms of conversation. Not every verbal interaction is a dialogue. So there are monologues. I'm doing a bit of a monologue now. Monologues, there's a time and a place for them. It can be a great way of transmitting information. But as it said, 2 monologues do not make a dialogue. Because if people are in the pattern of serial monologues, not really listening to one another, you're never going to land on some fresh thinking and new ideas. Coming up, this conversation continuum, we could also acknowledge that there are debates when people do nail their colours to the mast. Maybe they take quite fixed positions. It can be very energizing. It can be helpful to know where people clearly stand on an issue. But the limitation is that it can be quite combative, quite oppositional in the atmosphere. And again, limited in its potential to lead to some fresh thinking, innovative ideas. Then there's a discussion. And again, there's a time and a place for a discussion. The root of the word discussion is shared with percussion and concussion, and it means to shake apart. So it can be great to have a discussion about the known knowns. We've got options X, Y, and Z. Let's talk through the pros and cons. Again, though, limited, I would say, in terms of getting to a more generative place. And then we come to dialogue. Dialogue, it's sometimes called the art of thinking together, not just talking together, but really thinking together. And I think it's different to monologue, debate, discussion, because it has the potential to be more generative. And in terms of the atmosphere, it's more reflective. So instead of people shooting from the hip or throwing their toys out of the pram, sometimes we slow down and we will explore what really matters here. Let's take the time to hear from different people with divergent perspectives. Finally, on this diagram, you'll see that I've put a line in there, and that's to represent that I think there's a threshold to cross to get into the space of dialogue. Most of the teams and the leadership teams I work with can do monologue, debate, discussion quite effortlessly. But to get into that dialogic space, including around purpose, I think it requires a different mindset and a different skill set. A mindset where nobody is trying to win, nobody's trying to have their point of view prevail, but there's a more of a generosity of spirit and a genuine curiosity about what other people think, and a sense that actually it's in the synthesis of ideas that the best thinking can emerge. And the skills it requires include things like deeper listening to what the whole room is saying about a topic. And that calls for a certain open-mindedness and open-heartedness. So that's our conversation continuum. And then just finally for now, a few pointers about what I think makes a dialogue authentic. And you might well have other things that you would add to this list. And so what we've got here, I've put real human connection. So actually really welcoming what people genuinely think and feel, even if that causes a little bit of discomfort from time to time. Listening without judgment, easy to say, difficult to do sometimes. But I often begin the sessions I run with focusing people on the quality of their listening. We often don't pay attention to that. Encouraging people to show up as with what they really think, what's true for them. And I acknowledge that that sometimes is uncomfortable So I sometimes set a ground rule around welcome uncomfortable moments, because it's worth riding out that discomfort in order to get to something more real for a group of people. Dialogue, I think true dialogue involves taking a risk sometimes to say what you really think or feel. In that way, we're making ourselves vulnerable, vulnerable to challenge, vulnerable to being asked further questions. But as I've said, I think dialogue, authentic dialogue, can lead to new thinking. Sometimes that arises out of people's willingness to share half-baked ideas, things that they haven't fully thought through. But some of our best thinking sometimes begins out in the weeds, including purpose and identity. Who are we as a team? What do we stand for? Can also, as I've said, drop the dialogue onto a deeper level. A true dialogue, I think, includes growth and change. It sometimes calls on us to be a bigger version of ourselves, to not be reactive, to be more present and open to what other people think and feel. And finally, I think a true dialogue doesn't necessarily mean people change their opinions. They might do, but I think what it can do is leave you feeling more lucid, understanding a topic more fully, creating, Bill Isaacs would call it a pool of shared understanding, and that can bring a greater sense of clarity, if not a change in opinion. So let me come to a couple of questions then to take into your breakout rooms, and Chris will help with this shortly. So please just go for whichever question is most energizing for you and your group. Where's the center of gravity on that conversation continuum of monologue, debate, discussion, dialogue in your team or in a team that you work with if you're a coach, consultant? What would it take to nudge the team upwards? What could you do to make that happen? What question, if a dialogue is a conversation with a center, not sides, what question might you put in the center to create a dialogue? So we'll put those questions in the chat for you. Over to you, Chris.
Okay, so we've got the room set up. I'm going to open them now. And should we say 12 minutes, Sarah?
Sounds great, thank you.
Excellent. So hope you have great time in the chat, and we shall see you all very shortly.
Great, well, welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a great conversation. I appreciate some of you might just have that sense of we were just getting started and we're back here. So I'm going to invite you to use the chat to share just any insights, any further questions. It's been great to see the activity in the chat. I'm going to go into some more content very shortly. There'll be a second breakout room conversation on the back of that. And maybe when we come back from that, we could hear from you as well. So, but just a couple of comments in the chat already around just how do we help leaders to listen better? What a resonant question that is. One of the things I do is I sometimes point to the likes of Otto Scharmer, the thought leader, who talks about listening being the most underrated leadership skill, and the best leaders are the ones who are able to listen to the whole room. Some of you might be familiar with Nancy Klein's work, Time to Think. And she has a pattern of starting a dialogue with thinking pairs, where the invitation is in effect to actually do a monologue in a pair, and then as the partner you're listening. So I use similar patterns to that often in my own work, getting people to deepen their listening early on, often just in a pair to begin with. It's a big question. There's much more I could say on that, but I am going to come on and just share some more content with you. And as I say, I'll come back to the chat and have a look at that shortly. So Here we go. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with this notion of psychological safety and how important that is to get an authentic dialogue, including around purpose. So I'm not going to go through the cartoon in any detail. You'll get the slide deck, but this is the work of Professor Amy Edmondson at Harvard Business School. How do we know we've got psychological safety in the room? You'll hear people saying this kind of thing. So people are no longer feeling as though they've got to walk on eggshells around other people, but they feel safe to say things like, I don't know, can you help me? Can you share your thinking here, so that the conversation becomes more real? You'll also see across these two cartoons that we're also really including how people feel and what they care about, which again can be quite a shift in the conversation that can help people both feel more safe and more vulnerable. But the upside is that the conversation becomes more real. And so anything we can do to get psychological safety in the room is valuable. And as a leader, sometimes that means being willing to engage in some authentic self-disclosure ourselves. And so how can you have an authentic dialogue around purpose then? And so if you'll indulge me for a moment, this is a quote from my own book, Powered by Purpose, where I'm saying that the purpose mindset is intrinsically different to the business as usual way of thinking. In the corporate world, we are much more comfortable engaging with the left hemisphere of our brains, with its linear thinking and logical analysis, which works very well when pounds and pence are the means and end, than the right hemisphere. However, purpose is all about maximizing well-being for groups of people or the natural world in the longer term, and that is much more complex. And it's the right hemisphere that can take the long view, see the bigger picture, and live with uncertainty. The cultural dominance of the left hemisphere, with its chronic desire for certainty during times of volatility and the era of big data that we're living in, will militate against purpose unless both hemispheres and their respective capacities for analysis on the left-hand side and more systemic awareness on the right-hand side are integrated. So many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere and these different capacities. And what I'm arguing here really is that we need to include both to have an authentic dialogue around purpose. Some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the work of Ian McGilchrist, a contemporary philosopher and psychiatrist, where he's done a lot of work about the two hemispheres of the brain. And he's saying that it's the right hemisphere, with its understanding of possibility, change and flow, that is much better than the left hemisphere at incorporating new information, new ideas, without necessarily having to abandon it. And it's the left hemisphere that gets so attached to fixed ideas and sticks stubbornly to what it knows at all costs, in the teeth of evidence to the contrary. So where I'm going with this is that anything we can do to include more right hemisphere energy is valuable. And here is a tool, and Marie Smith, I'm grateful to you, one of the long-standing members of the Purpose Collective, who shared this tool with me from the Be Humankind community. And this is a tool that they use for checking in on how people are feeling, linking it to our capacity for kindness and acknowledging that there are very different emotional states that we can be in. We might be feeling secure and appreciated, We might be feeling open or inspired, which you can see on the right-hand side of the diagram. But team members will be walking into the room sometimes feeling on the left-hand side of the page, feeling anxious or uncomfortable about things, feeling blocked about something or powerless. And so actually laying out these different emotional states, helping people to clarify where they are, encouraging them to be honest, can be one way of including more of the right hemisphere territory. A tool I've also come across and I've used myself are these wonderful bear cards, introduced to me by Anita Hughes, who's an educational psychologist who does lots of amazing work with groups. Originally created for children, it's a whole set of cards with these pictures of bears on them in different emotional states. And I've worked with teams, including quite senior leadership teams. It's not the first thing I do with them. It might be on day 2, but I ask them to pick a card to represent how they're feeling right now. And I remember with one team, somebody picked the bear card where the bear arm is in a bandage, and that team member went on to talk about how they felt hurt about some of the things that had happened in that team. And that was the turning point. That was the pivot moment in the dialogue. And I think if we hadn't have had a kind of oblique way of getting into that conversation, it probably never would have happened. So a great resource there, created by an Australian psychiatrist. It looks kind of kiddie, but it can really help with getting to a deeper dialogue, the bear cards, bear feeling cards. So just to acknowledge then, an authentic dialogue around purpose has different, it involves certain shifts in mindset, shifting from the short-term focus to a longer-term focus, widening the lens, maybe including societal well-being, a shift in focus from serving only shareholders to a much wider array of stakeholders, maybe shifting the focus from profit maximization at all costs to putting people and a social purpose first, maybe shifting focus from seeking power over to empowering people to do great work, wanting their thinking to help with decision making. Those are really big shifts. So no wonder the dialogue is sometimes quite challenging around purpose. And so one of the things that can help, I've said earlier about the definition of dialogue, is to have a question or a focus right at the center of the conversation. And there's been some great work done by Blueprint for Better Business, which is a UK not-for-profit founded by Charles Wookey. And they published some great material, and I've adapted some of that for my own work. And here are some of the questions that they suggest leadership teams could be very usefully grappling with. So I'm not going to go through these in any detail, and you'll have them in the slide deck, but questions like, well, what does success look like? How do we measure it? How do we review it? How might success feel? What's the quality of dialogue like in our leadership team? How are our conversations connected with our purpose as an organization? And then just a second set of questions there. As you can see, how are our people feeling? Can we give examples of how we've responded to their concerns? For example, about working a 4-day week or continuing to work a 5-day week. So I think these are a great set of questions that Blueprint for Better Business have come up with. So back to you and your breakout room conversations. So a couple of questions for you, and we'll put these in the chat. How could you, in your leadership, in your work, maybe that's as a coach, as a consultant, bring more, so I've called it right hemisphere energy into the room? And what's the conversation that your team or a team you work with needs to have about purpose? What's the juicy question? What's the question or the topic that would engage and energize people? So again, I'm going to come.
I'm going to open the rooms then, Sarah. Should do 10 minutes because I think we're at 10:46.
Yeah, that's it. Questions in the chat. Thank you, Chris.
Okay, and so we'll see you all in 10 minutes.
I'm going to invite you to use the chat to share insights, share questions. Great to see people sharing resources as well. Thank you, Victor, for mentioning some great books, to Alina for the Deck Hive link as well. Some great questions have been asked, and I'm just going to briefly acknowledge dialogue is definitely more tricky in larger groups. I think maybe because most of us are brought up in much smaller families, typically, 4 or 5 in a family maybe, or 3, and getting a group of people, 25 people, 40 people in the room, 12 people thinking together, there is an art to it, and I think a bit of a science to it as well. Yes, it's more difficult when there's time pressure, and it's more tricky online, but not impossible. I think understanding the difference between dialogue, debate, discussion, monologue helps people to carve out the time sometimes that a true dialogue needs. And also some questions and comments about silence. And I think people who are silent are sometimes contributing quite fully by their listening presence. So we can't always assume if people are silent, they're not participating. That said, research shows in high-performing teams, one of the patterns you get in dialogue is roughly equal airtime. And so I often set that as a ground rule at the start of a dialogue session, to share airtime equally, do some conversational turn taking. Chatty ones, keep an eye on your contributions. Quiet ones, let's hear from you too. So all of that helps. We will share the chat with you as well as the slides and the recording. So thank you very much for coming. Chris, Alberto, I know you want to do a shout out for the next session. If there's anything burning in the chat, maybe you could let me know. Otherwise, let's talk about what's on the agenda, what's coming up.
I'm gonna quickly take a couple of screenshots so you know how it works. Smile. You can put the best book ever on purpose here as well. 1, 2, 3. And another one, because I have 2 screens, because you are so many and so nice people. I'm gonna do it again. And smile. 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much.
And then hopefully you will all join us in 2 weeks' time. We've got Claude Silver, who's the Chief Heart Officer at VaynerMedia. So we're really looking forward to that session. She is Gary Vaynerchuk's, Gary V's right-hand woman, bringing kindness into leadership. And in the February 17th, we have Professor Ranjay Gulati from Harvard Business School, who's got a book coming out called Deep Purpose, which could be in the running to be the second best book on purpose out there. But so really excited about the 2 upcoming sessions. I think we've run out of time. So thank you all. It's great to be back together with the Purpose Collective community. We hope you had a great session, and we hope we'll see you all again soon. So everybody, if you want to unmute and say thank you to Sarah and bye.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Sarah, bye.